So I have a polystyrene head here, and the problem with these heads is that they are way too small. They are possibly more suited to children, really. So for the purposes of creating, say, a mask or a headpiece, etc., for theatre, for film, for TV, this head is going to have to be adapted. You can buy heads for milliners to make hats. They may be wooden, they may be made from linen and an understructure that's much more firm. But what I thought I'd do is show you how you could adapt these cheaper polystyrene heads to be something useful that you can use. But I want to keep this polystyrene head and use it over and over. So we're actually going to create a layer of structure on top of it that can be cut and peeled off and reconstructed into something firm that you can stick pins in and use over and over again, whereby I'll still have this polystyrene head afterwards that I can reuse and recreate various other types of heads. So it's, in a way, it's probably good that it's quite small, but I also wanted something with a suitable nose that was more realistic than this in terms of size. And also this one hasn't got ears. So I would like to make sure it had ears, because without that I can't properly form a suitable mask or headpiece. And also I would like to build on the neck here to have some shoulders at some point, somewhat like the Ed heads that you get from Neil's Materials, for example, to sculpt on. However, that will be for a later stream. Let's just go through what might be needed for something like this that we're going to do today. So basically we're going to cover it with a layer of cling film. So the cling film is there just to make it easier to get the paper mache layers off afterwards, and it will also mean that it'll be instead of Vaseline. Obviously on a real human you would have to make sure that the breathing air holes are open, and you would not use cling film. You would use a layer of Vaseline to assist in taking off usually alginate, etc., plaster bandage, etc., from the model's head. But this isn't a model, a real person, we don't have to worry about breathing. So, but we are going to try and do it. This has a seam line here. We are going to try and do it in 2 halves and try and keep this seam line in place so that when we take the 2 halves off, we will be able to reconstruct this paper mache with a better shaped nose. We'll probably put the ears on afterwards once it's been rejoined. Okay, so you're going to need for that obviously your cheapish polystyrene head. You are going to need some cling film. You will need masking tape, like so. Masking tape is designed to keep the cling film fitting much more closely to the head. Then very cheap foil, which will be applied directly on top of the cling film first, so that we can create an inner layer that if I want to fill this paper mache with another material to make it more solid afterwards, once the 2 halves have gone together, this won't absorb the moisture as the paper mache itself would. I will also be using this just cheap craft children's PVA glue, but I may in addition be using some wood Titebond type wood stronger glue to make sure that this stuff is obviously made to be washed off, and that may be counterproductive later. But in terms of the initial paper mache layers, this will be perfectly fine, and it's cheap and readily available. In fact, I got this particular large bottle reduced Sainsbury's for £1, and that is a 1 litre bottle. You need a lot of glue. You can slightly water it down. However, you use a lot more than you think, so the smaller bottles won't do. It's helpful, you can use your fingers a lot, it's fairly safe, but it's helpful to use a strong bristled brush like these, like this one's a chip brush, this one's a hog's hair effect. It's probably synthetic, not real hog's hair, but brushes like this to make sure that you can poke and smooth the glue properly. I've pre-shredded newspapers into strips of about 6, 7, 8 centimetres, 1, 2 centimetres wide. If you do all this in advance, try to separate out the pieces. But I also want to try using this brown packing paper material because I think that might form a good strong layer for some purposes. So that a hairdryer may be useful to you just to speed up the layers. You want to do it in layers and dry each layer. There will be a certain amount of shrinkage, but you want to do it in layers. So that is it in terms of the basic requirements for this initial stage of getting ready to cover your polystyrene head in paper mache in 2 distinct halves. It would be useful actually to also have Sharpie pens, but here we have a polystyrene head. It makes a lot of noise, so we're going to put on, not handle it too much because it's very, very squeaky near to the camera. One of the first things we're going to do is use cling film to cover the polystyrene head. This way I'm going to be able to reuse the polystyrene head and create different shaped heads around it. But the main issue is that these heads are not made to human proportions and therefore are not suited to making head pieces, masks. It doesn't have sufficiently formed facial features, ears, etc. So we're going to create a structure over this that we can extract from it and basically create something that is a lot more related to human head proportions. I'm going to cover it with cling film. This doesn't have to be beautifully done, but this is basically the barrier that will stop our paper mache, Mod Rock, whatever it is we use on top of this from sticking and protect. It will protect the polystyrene to a degree and create that layer that Vaseline would create on a human head cast. A human head cast is really useful for prosthetics, etc., but it's not necessary for creating masks that would fit multi-purpose. There's going to be some crinkling of noise here, but obviously, which will mess with the camera a bit. I'm going to add a few layers so that it covers all aspects and then use masking tape to keep it firm and close to the head. It does tend to stick to itself, as you know, if you've used it for food covering. So cut it a little bit longer than you think you need. I think we will go under the base. In the end, I would like to create and apply this to a set of shoulders because, as you can see, it is quite low, and some of the bigger headdresses would require you to have some of the weight for carnival costumes or for theatre headdresses to be supported by the shoulders of the performer. So there would need to be normally some consideration for that. Even shop-bought mannequins that have shoulders, their heads are not realistically proportioned. And we will go into that in a little bit more detail. Right, so this time I'm going to start at the base, she says. It's gone under the base this time. Sorry, it will make quite a loud, annoying noise on the webcam. Apologies. Pushing in. We can do this because she's just a polystyrene head. You can get male and female heads. But I think these are so small that really only they'd be suited to a child. So what I'm doing is just checking, rotating, that we've got plenty of coverage, no parts of the polystyrene are visible. I'm now just smoothing it closer to the head to make sure that we can attach the clinging film as closely as possible to the form underneath. So we have our head, got some masking tape here. I just want to make sure that it clings. It does seem to have clung quite well. I don't really want a lot of crinkles that masking tape could give. Sometimes it's best to have shorter pieces. I just wanted to make sure that it does grab under the chin and under the neck. So pulling it tight here will keep that defined neck in place. We will build and exaggerate these very flat facial features anyway. You could just put a bit of masking tape underneath the base to make sure that the cling film doesn't creep away. From underneath the base, one in the process. You can see that there is a hole underneath the polystyrene head that could prove useful to place it on a sculpture stand sometimes. So that should help. Right. Okay, so I think that is okay for the moment. Now, PVA glue. This is just the cheap, very cheap children's water soluble. At some point it's likely that I'm just going to apply one initial layer. You've got to be patient and do things in layers. But I may ultimately use much stronger wood glue. So for the moment, I've put the cling film on to act as a barrier. What I am going to use as well on top of the cling film is this very cheap budget foil. I'm going to rip it in sections. This could also provide a barrier between the initial layer and a potential core material that I might use. So obviously it won't absorb water, this. So I might be able to fill it without the water being absorbed into the paper mache mixture. So I haven't pre-ripped these, but it is better if you do rip it. So I'll just do a few pieces to make this a little bit easier once we get going. So I have tried, you'll see by the camera that I've got a box of newspaper, I want to try this brown packing material that comes with a lot of the Amazon packages that I order. And I thought it looked like it might prove to be quite a strong material. And I'd like to recycle and use some of these materials. So this very cheap budget foil is quite malleable. It's very thin, much thinner than the high quality turkey foil, but perfect for this job really, which is to create the initial barrier that will be on the inner core. Apologies for the noise. Right, so I've got a few sheets here, and I'm now going to use some of this packaging. Great, because ultimately it can be thrown away. So I'll just see if we can use this cheap children's glue first. I can cover it at the end. If there is any left over, I can cover it at the end with cling film to enable it to continue to be used for a while. And I'm going to try just using this chip brush. I mean, they do lose their bristles, which is a nuisance. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to coat a fine layer of this over the head. And this probably, am I going to do it in 2 halves? Yes, that's worth thinking about. So I am going to try to remember that I am going to cover this in 2 halves. So I'm going to do the front half of the face and then the second half of the face. That will mean that I'll have 2 halves that I can then pull away from the mannequin head, and I'll be able to stick those halves together again at a later stage. So I have to see, can I still see the seam? And I'll probably put a masking tape line for the back so that I can be reminded and also not go over the line, to retain that kind of line. I will add further glue, just making sure that I think that's escaped. There's a bit of a gap there with the cling film. So let's get a bit more cling film that I've not noticed that gap. So there's a gap on the chin. So we'll just add that on. Right, while I'm here, I will also get the masking tape as I just mentioned before. I don't know whether it will stick particularly well now that I have added some glue, but this is to help me to denote that the back half of the head try not to go past. So I can do this in 2 halves. I'm just checking for the seam that I can see through. Here's the seam here. I could have put a dark Sharpie line, I recommend, so you can see it more clearly before you apply the cling film. Do it in pieces once it's got a shape to it. That way it will go around the shaped head a lot more easily. So I think once I've got this masking tape in place all around the side of the head to denote the front half and the back half, I will get a Sharpie pen and I can then see that line a lot more clearly and help to remind myself so I don't get carried away and add the kind of paper mache over the whole lot, because obviously that would lead to it locking and not being able to get it off, or I would be cutting it off, which of course again you might damage the head more than you might want it to. I'm looking at this line here. I've definitely come over that line more than the polystyrene one is anyway. So go underneath. Okay. So with a Sharpie, which I didn't get out, did I get out a Sharpie? No, I didn't. So I have my pencil case here anyway, and I have a bunch of Sharpies. So these are either real Sharpies or you can get quite good Sharpie imitations. Obviously Sharpies can mark on plastic. So I could see the seam line better here. So I now need to kind of mark this over the top of the head, so it will be a nice clear line. Let's start again here because I can see it really clearly at the base. It's much further over there, isn't it? So I think I'm going to move this over a little bit. Just keeping an eye on where it is I'm going. There we go, it's lining up a little bit better now. So this line, let me just have a quick look at that. I'm going to make sure that I can tell the difference between So I'm holding the back. It's a lot easier, of course, because that doesn't have any glue on it at the minute. I probably should have done this first, really. That's the trouble with live demos. You realise in the middle of it, it might have been better if you'd have done this from the beginning. Okay, so I'm ignoring that line, just put a little squiggle through that. Okay, so lid back on the Sharpie. Don't want it drying out. Move that out of the way. So I had started to add glue to the front, just making sure. I can now paste up to that line over the masking tape. You will see that the cling film's getting a little bit soggy. And I'm going to start to put the foil up to that line. And I might try to make a bit of a folded line, to be honest, on where the so-called seam will be. That way it's going to be a thicker, firmer edge, so when I divide it later, it will be a thicker edge than not just too weak and thin. I'll probably have to do this again. So I'm going up to that line, but not past it. Let's just populate some of the rest of it. But when I go near the line, I'm going to make sure that I have a stronger, thicker line. And of course the thickness of the strength of the hog's hair tight brush, like these chip brushes, will enable it to hug the shape underneath. So I'll keep away from the line for the minute, and the side line from the minute. Looks a bit like gold leaf. Same technique, only this isn't nearly as expensive. So there is already a layer of glue, as I've explained. Some overlapping. This is just the inner layer that will be underneath the paper mache. And this cheaper foil will bend and flex and stick a lot more. I don't really want too many creases in it, really. It's just there to strengthen and add a different material that won't absorb water. So I can lay it down to a degree on that side. Just going to get some folded edges. Doesn't really matter whether it's the shiny or the, so this thicker edge leading up to the line, to make sure it's a stronger line, a stronger seam when those two halves are pulled apart later. And that will go for, that'll be the same. So more of an overlap at this edge to strengthen. Thicker piece, so I'm folding it over. you pour too much glue out at once, obviously it will tend to go to thicken and start to dry a little bit. So you want to try and just pour out what you think you might need in one batch, one flow. Right, this is an overhang, so it will probably not need to go underneath too much, just a little bit. Right, so I'm starting to build up this one side. Okay, with this foil there, put the head there. Right, just building up these layers and moulding them around the head. So we don't lose the definition of, well, there isn't much definition on this head, I can assure you, but we don't lose what we already have anyway. Our intention is to build up the layers over the top to create heads that will be more in keeping proportionally and features wise of a kind of, in this case, average female sized head. The same can be used with the same mannequin can be used with to form a male head, but obviously it will be bigger. It will be bigger and it will need more layers put on, in larger nose, chin, jaw, etc. I can lie it down. Now don't try and put too many layers down at once. I do have a hairdryer on hand, so I will be speeding up the process carefully with the hairdryer. You don't want, if you've got a lot of time, which is not usually the case, it is quite often better to allow natural temperatures. This is kind of my front room. It's not a cold workshop, so there is a degree of heat in your home, much more than there might be in a workshop. So you want to try and smooth out some of those wrinkles. And you can do that a little bit with your fingers. This particular children's PVA glue is washable. So that means if you do get it any way you don't want, it should come out. However, that's not always conducive to us wanting something that is very, very firm and durable. Hence me thinking about additional layers in the end and coating it with a wood glue, which will make it a lot harder and durable, the final head shape cast. So try and push in some of these shapes here so I can still tell where the head is, where the eyes are. Eye sockets. You can use your fingers to push that in. And by drying these in, you won't lose that definition. Again, push, find the eyes. So when you see other demos online, you might not see this foam layer. But as I explained, I'm wanting to do this so that I can fill the core potentially with another material, and that paper mache, without the use of wood glue, it might be all right with wood glue, won't get any moisture absorption because of the foil barrier. Okay, so going over the nose here. Oh, what nose it has? It's got a very, very flat nose. Hence the reason I'm definitely going to be drying this before too long, this first layer, so I can retain. I might even mark with pen once it's dry these positions, because it really isn't, they're not really that raised, and these are the areas that we'll have to build on, these areas here, to make sure that I can build a nose that is a little bit more in keeping of a normal nose in definition, a defined nose anyway. So these, once we've created our own realistic proportioned human head cast using these materials, of course you can potentially try plaster bandage and other materials, but these are materials that most of us have available to us. I've now got to use some more foil. These materials will use up things that we have in our house, things to get to recycle. Thereby making it more environmentally friendly, at least, by using up what would potentially be thrown or recycled in other ways. So let's go here. And the chin area, one piece at a time so we can grab the definition. Don't forget slight overlaps, otherwise it will be too weak. It won't act as the barrier. Okay, push in around the mouth, the nose, the eye sockets. Keep on doing that as the glue slightly dries. Oops. Carry on down the chin. Smooth out the creases. I'm wondering if this chin's going to stick because I had a gap in that cling film. Okay. So some thicker pieces around the seam line with the fold to overlap with the previous join. I've got to keep remembering that. It will certainly make it easier in the end to remove the two halves. So let's make sure that I do keep it over this side of the line. Yep. It's the layers that will give it its strength. Crisscrossing layers, ripped layers will blend more easily than cut layers. So it isn't a good idea, you might think it would be, to cut your foil or paper, because you'll get sharp lines that won't blend one into each other. So wherever you see gaps, make sure you've not got gaps and layer it over. You want to follow the contours of the head and the neck and the chin. Oops, come back. I think there was a gap there. Keeping it, oh, there's a gap there as well. So these smaller pieces aren't wasted. They'll help to capture the shape and form underneath. Let's get this neck covered. May well have to do this in 4/4, but that is of no consequence because you just want to make the joins and the seams, in other words, match together, and that will be fine. So more foil. So you can need more of a seam. Nearly done this front. The chin will be a challenge, no doubt, but let's see. Right. So this edge is a firm folded edge, and then going, whoops, lots of pieces sticking to my sticky fingers now. Oops, things are sticking to it. Right, I should move that out of the way. There's two pieces there. A little bit of glue underneath. Double line, join it to the last. Okay. If the pieces are too big, it's a good idea to rip, because it will just make it a bit unnecessarily chunky in areas that you don't want it to be. And again, glue will help to lay it flatter. And anything that is locked in place when I try to remove it later will have to be scalpeled, but re-seamed and rejoined. And we can do that with a cast over a polystyrene head, not so easily, and a human head. So we've nearly done the front section of this. Let's just check, go around. Oh, there's a gap here. Let's cover this. Let's not let it get away with us. It's a little bit thick there. We can cut away any pieces. More glue. Right. Checking the seams all the way around. Make sure they're lying flat. Check. Maybe it might be an idea just add a little bit more glue here and there, and then I can use my finger to smooth down some of the, in fact I can dip my finger in the glue, reform some of these details, the eye sockets, the nose, smooth it out actually at the same time. I've just got to smooth out the foil, the wrinkles in the foil. Add a bit more glue where it didn't have quite enough. Oh, I've noticed that I've pulled that. Oh, jeez. I don't know. Let's add a bit more glue here. Move that over a little bit to that seam line. That's right. Okay. Quick check. Right, so now we're ready to move it over there. We can lean on the back of the head and plug in the hair dryer. Just give it intermittent blasts. So obviously I will continue to do this for a bit longer, but it will speed up the process, and you won't literally be watching glue dry all day. You're going to speed up the layers, but it is, you do have to be patient with a lot of things, and this is one of them. Okay.